When what God promised and what you're actually living in stop matching, that's where you are right now. You held on to something, a whisper in prayer, a verse that felt alive, a certainty that settled so deep you knew it was Him, and you built your hope on it. But the job still hasn't opened, the diagnosis hasn't changed, the phone still doesn't ring. You look at what you believe He said, and you look at your life, and they don't line up, not even a little. So a question starts creeping in, quiet at first. Did I get this wrong? Did I imagine the whole thing? What if the problem was never the promise, but what you've been told a promise is supposed to look like while you wait for it? There is a particular kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with how much sleep you got last night. It is the tiredness of carrying something you cannot put down and cannot yet see resolved. Maybe it began with a whisper you couldn't quite explain to anyone else, a verse that seemed to leap off the page at exactly the right moment, a stillness in prayer that felt like assurance, a conviction that settled into your spirit so quietly and so certainly that you knew somehow this was from God. You didn't imagine it. You felt it the way you feel warmth from a fire, real and undeniable in the moment it touched you. And for a while, that whisper carried you. It gave you a reason to keep going when everything around you said stop. But time has passed since then, and what you're living in now looks nothing like what you believed was coming. The job hasn't opened. The test results haven't changed. The phone still doesn't ring with the apology you've been waiting years to hear. The marriage is still strained in the same places it was strained a year ago, maybe longer. The body still aches in the way it ached before you prayed for healing. You look at your life, and you look at what you believe God spoke to you, and the two don't match, not even a little. And so a question begins to form, quiet at first, then louder with every passing week. Did I get this wrong? You don't ask it out loud, not usually. It feels almost dangerous to say it, as if voicing the doubt might make it more true. So instead, it lives underneath everything else. It's there when you wake up, and your first conscious thought is the weight of what still hasn't happened. It's there in the pause before you pray, that half-second hesitation where you wonder if this is even worth bringing to God again, since apparently the last time didn't work the way you thought it would. It's there in the way you've started to brace yourself, quietly lowering your expectations so the disappointment won't hit as hard the next time. You call it being realistic, but somewhere underneath, you know it's something closer to grief. This is one of the loneliest places a person can live, inside the gap between what you believe God said and what you can currently see. It's lonely because it's invisible. Nobody around you can see this tension. From the outside, your life looks manageable. You still show up, you still function, you still smile in the conversations that require it. But inside, there's a low, constant hum of unresolved waiting, like a question mark that never gets to become a period. And the hardest part isn't even the circumstance itself. It's the not knowing what to do with the space between the promise and the proof. Maybe you've tried to talk yourself out of the whole thing. Maybe you've told yourself it was wishful thinking, that you heard what you wanted to hear because you needed hope so badly in that season. That explanation would almost be easier, wouldn't it? Because if it was never really from God, then at least the disappointment makes sense. But there's another part of you, quieter but stubborn, that refuses to let go of it. Something in you still believes it was real. And that's actually the harder place to stand, because it means you can't dismiss the promise, but you also can't produce the proof. You're stuck holding both at once, the conviction that God spoke and the reality that nothing has changed. Maybe you've also caught yourself doing the math, counting the months, comparing your situation to someone else's, wondering why their prayer got answered in 3 weeks and yours has stretched into years, wondering if there's something wrong with your faith, some deficiency in you that's keeping the promise locked away. This is a particularly cruel thought because it turns waiting into a verdict on your worth, as if delay were evidence of your failure rather than simply delay. And once that thought takes root, it doesn't stay contained. It starts to color everything. Your prayers become more anxious. Your Bible reading becomes more like searching for a loophole than resting in truth. Your days become a quiet performance of holding it together while a storm keeps circling underneath the surface. Here is the honest question underneath everything you've been carrying, whether or not you've had the words for it until now. What do you do when your circumstances contradict what you believe God said to you? Not what do you do to force the outcome, not what do you do to manufacture peace you don't actually feel, but what do you do, really, in the day-to-day reality of living inside a promise that hasn't yet taken visible shape? How do you keep believing something you cannot currently see without either lying to yourself about how hard it is or abandoning the conviction altogether? this tension you're feeling is not a sign that something has gone wrong in your faith. It's actually one of the oldest and most human experiences a person walking with God can have. Long before you, others have stood in this same gap, holding a word in one hand and an unchanged reality in the other, unsure which one to trust when they seem to contradict each other so plainly. That doesn't make the ache any smaller right now. It doesn't fix the bills, or reverse the diagnosis, or make the relationship whole again tonight. But it does mean you are not lost, and you are not the exception to how God works. You are, in fact, standing in a very familiar place, even if it feels like no one else has ever stood exactly here. What you don't yet know, what we're going to walk through together, is what this gap is actually for. Because it is not empty. It is not evidence of God's forgetfulness, and it is not proof that you misunderstood Him. There is something happening in this space, something you cannot yet measure by your circumstances, and understanding what that something is will change the way you carry every day you spend waiting from here forward. But before we get there, we have to be honest about what's really happening inside you when what you see keeps contradicting what you believe. Because the real battle was never actually about your circumstances catching up to the promise. It's about something much closer to home, a quiet war being fought every day between what your eyes report and what your spirit knows. And once you understand that battle clearly, you'll start to see this waiting season in a completely different light. Let's name something clearly, because clarity is where healing begins. The struggle you've been carrying is not really a struggle between faith and unbelief, as much as it might feel that way on your hardest days. It's something more specific than that. It's a struggle between sight and faith, between what your eyes report to you every single day and what you once heard in a place deeper than your eyes could reach. These are two very different sources of information, and they are constantly competing for the same territory, your trust. Your eyes are honest. In their own limited way, they tell you exactly what is in front of you: the empty bank account, the quiet phone, the same diagnosis on the same chart. Your eyes are not lying to you. But here's what your eyes cannot do. They cannot see what God is doing beneath the surface of your circumstances. They were never designed to. Eyes report the visible. Faith perceives what hasn't yet become visible. And when you only listen to your eyes, you end up building your entire sense of reality on half the information. This is where a very sneaky kind of doubt tends to sneak in, and it rarely announces itself as doubt. It usually shows up wearing the mask of realism. You tell yourself you're just being practical, just being honest about where things stand, just refusing to live in denial. And there is a kind of honesty that is healthy. Acknowledging the pain of your situation is not the enemy of faith, but there's a difference between honestly naming your circumstances and letting your circumstances quietly become the final judge of what is true and what is possible. When I'm being realistic slowly turns into this promise probably isn't happening. Realism has stopped being honest observation and started functioning as unbelief, wearing a more socially acceptable name. It helps to understand that this tension you're feeling isn't a flaw in your walk with God. It's actually the pattern you'll find running through almost every meaningful promise recorded in Scripture. Over and over, you see the same shape. Someone receives a word from God, and then, almost without exception, a gap opens up between that word and its fulfillment. Not a short pause, not a tidy waiting room with a clear number of minutes left on the clock. A real gap, sometimes stretching across years, where nothing visible confirms that the promise is still in motion. During that gap, the person carrying the promise typically looks, from the outside, exactly like someone whose prayer wasn't answered. The field is still barren. The prison door is still locked. The dream still hasn't come to pass. If you had walked up to any of them in the middle of their waiting and looked only at their circumstances, you would have concluded that nothing was happening, but something was happening. It just wasn't happening in the place their eyes could see. This is worth sitting with because it quietly dismantles a belief you may not have realized you were holding. The belief that a real promise should produce fast, visible evidence, and that if it doesn't, the promise probably wasn't real, or you probably heard it wrong. That belief feels logical. It even feels like faith, because it sounds like you're taking God's word seriously enough to expect Him to act. But underneath it is actually a subtle demand. Prove it to me now, in a form I can see, or I will stop trusting that it's true. And when we make our trust conditional on visible timing, we haven't strengthened our faith. We've quietly handed the authority over to our circumstances instead. So here is the honest, sometimes uncomfortable truth. The gap you're standing in right now is not a malfunction. It's not a sign that you did something wrong, or that God changed his mind, or that the promise expired somewhere along the way. The gap is where something is being formed, in the word itself and in you. Think about anything of real substance in your life. Nothing durable is made instantly. Trust between two people isn't built in a single conversation. Strength in a body isn't built in a single workout. Depth in character isn't built in a single decision. Anything with real weight to it requires time you cannot see happening. Time where the process looks like nothing is occurring, even though everything necessary is quietly taking shape. This reframes the question you've been asking. Instead of, why hasn't this happened yet? A better question begins to surface. One we'll spend the rest of this time exploring together. What if the gap is not evidence against the promise, but the very space where the promise is being prepared? What if delay is not the opposite of a promise being real, but simply part of how real promises tend to unfold? I want to be careful here, because this isn't meant to be a tidy explanation that erases how hard your waiting actually feels. The ache of holding a promise while living inside its opposite is real, and it deserves to be acknowledged rather than rushed past. You are allowed to feel the weight of unanswered prayer without pretending it doesn't hurt. But there is a difference between feeling the weight of the wait and believing the wait means the end of the story. The first is honest. The second is a conclusion your circumstances are trying to hand you without any actual authority to make that call. So the invitation right now isn't to force yourself into blind optimism or to pretend the contradiction between your life and the promise doesn't exist. The invitation is simply to start noticing which voice you've been letting have the final word. Your eyes have been giving daily reports, and it makes sense that you've been listening. They're loud, and they're constant, and they're right in front of you every morning when you wake up. But they were never meant to be the judge of what God is doing. They were only ever meant to report what is currently visible, and what is currently visible is not always the whole story. This leaves us with a real and important question, one we'll begin answering next. If delay isn't proof that the promise failed, what actually is it? What is happening in this space you can't see? Because there's a difference between simply enduring a gap and understanding what that gap is for. And once you understand what it's for, waiting starts to feel less like a void you're trapped in and more like ground you're standing on for a reason. Let's sit with a phrase that's simple to say, but takes real work to actually believe. Delay is not denial. On paper, it sounds almost obvious. Of course, a pause isn't the same as a no. But in the middle of an actual waiting season, your mind rarely experiences it that way. From the inside, delay and denial can feel completely identical. Both involve the same silence. Both involve the same unanswered question hanging in the air. Both involve watching another day pass with no visible change. So even though you know, intellectually, that not yet and no are different words with different meanings, your heart has probably been treating them as the same thing for a while now. This is one of the quiet tricks that prolonged waiting plays on the mind. It slowly starts to collapse the distance between this hasn't happened yet and this isn't going to happen. At first, you hold on to hope fairly easily. Early in the wait, it still feels close, still feels reasonable that any day now, things could shift. But as the weeks stretch into months and the months stretch further still, hope starts to feel almost naive to keep holding on to. So a subtle shift happens. Without ever making a conscious decision to give up, you start speaking to yourself in smaller and smaller terms. You stop saying when this changes and start saying if this changes. You stop preparing for the answer and start preparing for the disappointment instead, because at least then you won't be caught off guard again. This is worth naming clearly because it's easy to mistake this shift for wisdom. It feels responsible to lower your expectations. It feels like protecting yourself. But what's actually happening underneath is that delay has quietly convinced you it's denial, and you've started living according to that false equation without ever examining whether it's true. Here's what's actually true. Even though it doesn't always feel true in the moment, waiting is not empty space. It is not a stalled elevator between where you were and where God said you'd be. It is active. Something is happening in it, even on the days it feels like nothing is happening at all. Think about it this way. When a seed is planted in the ground, there's a period where the surface shows absolutely nothing. No sprout, no green, no visible sign that anything was ever planted there. If you only trusted your eyes during that stage, you'd assume the seed had failed or never existed at all. But underneath the soil, in the dark, in the place no one can observe from the outside, the seed is doing exactly what a seed is supposed to do. Roots are forming before any stem breaks the surface. The most important work is happening precisely in the stage that looks from above like nothing is happening. Your waiting is not passive stalling, it is active formation, whether or not it currently feels productive. This doesn't mean you need to manufacture some artificial sense of busyness to prove you're doing waiting right. It simply means that trust itself, the quiet, repeated choice to keep believing what was spoken over what is currently seen, is doing something real, even on the days it feels like you're simply enduring. Every time you choose to keep praying instead of going numb, every time you choose to keep hoping instead of hardening, every time you resist the pull to fully believe your circumstances have the final say, something is being strengthened in you that could not be strengthened any other way. Not because struggle is good in itself, but because trust that has never been tested has never actually been proven, not even to yourself. This is where the contrast between what you feel and what is true becomes especially important to notice. What you feel most days is probably something close to forgotten, overlooked, like the promise got filed away somewhere and God moved on to more urgent matters. That feeling is understandable. Silence is disorienting, and the human mind naturally fills silence with the worst available explanation. But feeling forgotten and being forgotten are not the same thing, no matter how convincing the feeling is. You are not being ignored in this gap. You are being formed in it. Those are two very different realities, even though they can feel almost identical from where you're standing. It might help to think about what you actually want from this whole situation. On the surface, you want the circumstance to change, the job to come, the healing to happen, the relationship to be restored. That desire is completely valid. There's nothing wrong with wanting resolution. But underneath that desire is usually something even deeper. You want to know that you haven't been forgotten. You want proof that you're not walking through this alone, that your prayers actually reached somewhere, that this waiting isn't pointless. That desire for reassurance is human, and it's tender, and it deserves to be honored rather than dismissed. But here's the important distinction. Reassurance doesn't have to come only in the form of the promise finally arriving. Sometimes reassurance comes first in the form of a steadiness growing inside you that wasn't there when the waiting began. Have you noticed that? Even in the middle of everything unresolved, something in you has shifted slightly. Maybe you don't panic quite as fast as you used to when another week passes with no change. Maybe there's a thread of calm running underneath the frustration that wasn't there when this season first started. That's not nothing. That's not a coincidence either. That's the quiet evidence of active formation happening in you, even while the outer circumstance remains the same. So if waiting is active rather than passive, if something real is genuinely being produced in this space, the next honest question becomes, what, specifically, is it producing? What is actually taking shape while you wait? Because it's one thing to say, trust the process, as a comforting phrase, and another thing entirely to understand what that process is actually forming inside you. That understanding is what will let you stop measuring this season only by what hasn't happened yet and start recognizing what already has. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from the waiting itself, but from trying to manage the waiting, from trying to figure out the timing, control the outcome, or engineer the resolution through sheer effort of will. If you found yourself replaying scenarios in your mind, if this happens, then that could happen, and maybe if I just do this one more thing, it will finally move. You already know this exhaustion intimately. It's the tiredness of carrying something that was never yours to carry in the first place. The responsibility of making the promise come true on your own strength and on your own schedule. Here's something worth being honest about. God's timing does not operate according to human logic, and this is one of the hardest things to accept, especially for a mind that's used to solving problems through effort and strategy. In most areas of life, effort produces results. Work hard enough, plan carefully enough, push long enough, and eventually you see movement. That pattern serves you well in a lot of areas, but it doesn't transfer neatly onto the timing of God. And when you unconsciously apply that same formula to a spiritual promise, you end up frustrated in a very specific way. Not just disappointed that the promise hasn't come, but confused about why your effort isn't producing the progress it usually would. This is worth sitting with because it touches something deeper than the circumstance itself. When you can't predict or control the timing of something you care about deeply, it can feel like the ground underneath you has become unstable. So the mind does what minds do when they feel unstable. It tries to regain control however it can. Maybe that's looked like overanalyzing every small development, searching for hidden signs and meanings in things that don't actually carry any. Maybe it's looked like trying to force doors open that God hasn't opened yet, out of a desperate need to make something happen rather than sit in the discomfort of not knowing. Maybe it's looked like bargaining in prayer, trying to find the right combination of faith or effort or obedience that will finally unlock the outcome, as if God were a lock waiting for the correct sequence. None of this makes you weak or unfaithful. It makes you human. Wanting resolution, wanting control over what feels uncontrollable is one of the most natural responses there is to prolonged uncertainty. But it's worth asking honestly, has any of that gripping, striving, managing actually produced peace? Or has it mostly produced more fatigue, layered on top of the fatigue you were already carrying from the waiting itself? Here is a truth that can feel almost countercultural in a world that prizes control above almost everything else. Surrender is not the same as giving up on the promise. This distinction matters enormously because a lot of people avoid surrender precisely because they mistake it for resignation, as if releasing control means abandoning hope or admitting defeat. But that's not what surrender actually is. Surrender is releasing the demand to manage how and when the promise comes, while still holding on to the conviction that it will. It's the difference between saying, "I no longer believe this will happen," and saying, "I no longer need to be the one who makes this happen." Those are two entirely different postures, even though from the outside they might look similar. Both involve loosening your grip, but one loosens your grip on hope, and the other loosens your grip on control while keeping hope firmly intact. This matters even more when you consider what your sense of stability has quietly been resting on. If your peace depends on knowing exactly when and how the promise will arrive, then your peace is only ever as strong as your certainty about the timeline. And certainty about timing is something you have never actually had. Not really, even in the moments you felt most confident. But if your peace rests somewhere else, not on knowing when, but on trusting who, then the uncertainty of timing doesn't have the same power to destabilize you. Your identity, your worth, your sense of being loved and seen by God were never meant to be tethered to whether or not this particular promise has materialized on the schedule you had in mind. This is worth pausing on because it's easy to let the delay quietly become a referendum on your value. If it hasn't happened yet, maybe I'm not enough. Maybe I'm being punished. Maybe everyone else's prayers matter more than mine. These thoughts are common, and they are also lies, dressed up convincingly enough to feel like honest self-assessment. Your worth was never determined by how quickly your circumstances resolve, and God's love for you was never contingent on your ability to produce faith strong enough to force an outcome. He is not waiting for you to perform your way into the promise. He is inviting you to rest while it continues forming in a timeline that answers to something far wiser than what either of us could calculate on our own. Releasing control doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent about your life. It doesn't mean you stop taking reasonable steps, stop applying for the job, stop caring for your health, stop showing up where showing up is wise. Surrender isn't the absence of action. It's the absence of anxious gripping underneath the action. You can still do what's yours to do while releasing what was never yours to control in the first place. The exact moment, the exact method, the exact shape the answer will take. So here is where this leaves us, honestly. If control was never going to bring the promise any closer, and if your worth was never tied to the timeline in the first place, then what exactly are you supposed to hold on to while you wait? If gripping tighter doesn't help, what does trust actually look like in the meantime? Not as an abstract idea, but in the ordinary, unremarkable hours of an average day. That's the question worth turning toward next. Because trust isn't only a feeling you either have or don't have. It's something practiced, moment by moment, especially in the place where the real battle is actually happening, not in your circumstances, but in your mind. If you've been paying close attention to everything we've walked through so far, you may have already noticed something important. The real battlefield in this entire season isn't out there in your circumstances. It's in here, in your mind. Your circumstances simply are what they are, unresolved for now. But what you do with those circumstances inside your thoughts, what you allow them to mean, what conclusions you let them draw for you, That's where the actual struggle takes place, hour by hour, thought by thought. Here's something worth being honest about. Your circumstances are loud. They don't have to try very hard to get your attention because they're right in front of you constantly. The empty inbox is loud every time you check it. The quiet phone is loud every time you glance at it. Hoping, the same body, the same diagnosis, the same unresolved tension in the relationship. All of it is loud simply by being present and unchanged. And what was spoken to you, that quiet inner conviction, or that verse that once felt so alive, doesn't have that same built-in volume. It doesn't announce itself every morning. It doesn't demand your attention the way pain and lack and disappointment do. So without even realizing it, you've likely been letting the loudest voice in the room set the terms for what you believe is true, simply because it's the one shouting the most consistently. This is worth naming plainly. Your circumstances have been functioning as the final authority over your thoughts, even though they were never actually qualified for that role. Circumstances are honest reporters of the present moment. They are not prophets. They can tell you what is currently true, but they cannot tell you what God is doing, or what He has said, or where this is ultimately headed. And yet, because they're so present and so persistent, it's easy to unconsciously treat them as if they carry that authority anyway, as if the unchanged situation gets the final vote on what's real and what's possible. So here's the practice worth building. Gently and without pressure to get it perfect, anchoring your thoughts in what was spoken rather than only in what is currently seen. This doesn't mean denying the pain of the circumstance, and it doesn't mean pretending things are fine when they aren't. That would be its own kind of exhausting performance, and it isn't what real faith asks of you. You're allowed to say, honestly, this still hurts, this is still hard, I still don't understand why this is taking so long. Naming the pain accurately is not a failure of faith. In fact, pretending the pain isn't there usually just pushes it underground, where it grows heavier rather than lighter. Anchoring your thoughts means something different than denial. It means that after you've honestly acknowledged the weight of what you're carrying, you don't stop there and let the circumstance become the final word. You return, deliberately and repeatedly, to what was actually spoken to you, not as a magic phrase to make the discomfort disappear, but as the truer, deeper layer of reality underneath the surface-level report your circumstances keep giving you. It's the difference between saying, this is all there is, and saying, this is what's currently visible, but it is not the whole story. In practice, this might look like a very simple, quiet redirection that happens many times throughout an ordinary day. You notice the anxious thought rising, the one that says nothing is changing. This isn't working. Maybe it never will. And instead of following that thought all the way down into spiraling, you gently interrupt it, not with forced positivity, but with a return to what you know to be true beneath the surface. You might silently remind yourself, what I see right now is not the final word. Or, this feeling is real, but it is not the whole truth. This isn't about repeating a phrase until you've talked yourself into denial. It's about training your mind gradually to stop giving automatic authority to whatever is loudest in the moment. This matters because your mind has almost certainly built some deep grooves over the course of this waiting season. Well-worn paths where anxious, hopeless thinking flows easily because it's been flowing that way for so long. Those grooves don't disappear the moment you decide to think differently. They soften slowly through repetition, the same way any habit of thought is built or unbuilt. Every time you catch the spiral and gently redirect it, you're not achieving instant peace. You're doing something quieter but more lasting. You're weakening the groove that leads to despair and strengthening a new one that leads back to trust. It also helps to understand what this anchored trust is not aiming for. The goal is not to reach a place where the hard reality stops registering, where you no longer notice the pain or the unresolved tension. That would be numbness, not faith. The goal is simply to stop letting that hard reality have the final vote. You can feel the weight of an unanswered prayer and still hold, underneath that weight, a settled confidence that the story isn't finished being written. Both can be true in the same moment. Pain and trust are not opposites that cancel each other out. They can occupy the same space, the same day, sometimes the same hour. This is quiet work, and it isn't dramatic. Nobody around you will necessarily notice it happening. There's no visible milestone to mark the day your thoughts shifted their center of gravity from your circumstances back to what God spoke. But this quiet, repeated redirection is exactly the kind of formation we talked about earlier. The unseen work happening in the gap the roots forming before anything breaks the surface. And this leads us to something worth exploring next. Because as this anchoring becomes more familiar, something begins to shift in you that goes beyond simply managing anxious thoughts in the moment. A different question starts to rise, quietly replacing the one that's dominated your mind throughout this whole season. Instead of only asking, why hasn't this happened yet? You start to notice a new question forming, one that changes the entire posture of how you carry the weight. There is a moment in every extended season of waiting where something shifts, quietly, almost without you noticing it happening in real time. It isn't marked by a dramatic breakthrough or a sudden resolution of the circumstance. It's marked by a change in the question you're asking. For a long time, the dominant question has probably been some version of, why hasn't this happened yet? That question makes sense. It's the natural response to unresolved pain, and it's not wrong to ask it. But if you've been practicing what we talked about, if you've been slowly anchoring your thoughts in what was spoken rather than only in what is seen, you may start to notice a different question rising up alongside the old one, quieter but persistent. What is God doing in me while I wait? This is the turning point, not the moment the promise finally arrives. That's still ahead in whatever timing it comes. This is the turning point in you, in how you carry the unresolved space between now and then. And it's worth understanding just how significant this shift actually is, because it changes the entire emotional experience of waiting, even while the external circumstances remain exactly the same. When your only question is, why hasn't this happened? Waiting feels like a countdown with no visible clock, an agonizing stretch of time with nothing to measure except the growing distance between when you received the promise and now. Every day that passes without change feels like evidence piling up against you. The waiting has no purpose in that framework. It's just an obstacle standing between you and the thing you actually want, and every moment spent in it feels wasted. That's an exhausting way to live, because it means every single day is measured only by its failure to deliver an outcome. But when the question becomes, what is God doing in me while I wait? Everything about the texture of that same day changes. Suddenly, the waiting isn't empty time to be endured until the real thing starts. The waiting itself becomes the real thing, at least for now. Not the destination, but not a meaningless delay either. It becomes a season with its own purpose, its own value, its own quiet work happening inside you. That has nothing to do with whether the outer circumstance has shifted yet. This doesn't mean you stop longing for the resolution. It simply means the longing is no longer the only thing defining how you experience each day. Here's something worth noticing gently, without forcing it. Some of that inner formation has probably already been happening in you throughout everything we've walked through together. Think back to where you were when this waiting season began. Was the panic quite as sharp then as it feels reflectively now? Has there been, even slightly, a change in how quickly your mind spirals when another week passes without resolution? Maybe you still feel the ache. Maybe you still wish this were over. But there might be a steadiness running underneath that ache now that wasn't there before. A capacity to sit with the unresolved without being completely undone by it. If that's true for you, even in the smallest way, that is not a small thing. That's the quiet evidence that something real has been forming in the unseen middle. Exactly like roots forming beneath soil before anything breaks the surface. This is worth understanding clearly. Growth in seasons like this rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or a clear before and after moment you can point to. It shows up in smaller, quieter ways. A little more patience in a conversation that used to trigger anxiety instantly. A little less need to check for updates, to search for signs, to control every variable. A little more willingness to bring your honest disappointment to God instead of avoiding Him because the weight feels unfair. A slightly steadier ability to hold hope and grief in the same hand without one collapsing the other. These are not dramatic transformations. They are subtle. But subtle does not mean small insignificance. Subtle simply means it requires attention to notice, the same attention you might bring to noticing the first faint green tip of something breaking through soil that, for a long time, looked like it held nothing at all. This shift from panic to patient confidence is not the same as giving up urgency or no longer caring how things turn out. Patient confidence still hopes. It still prays with expectation. It still longs for the promise to take visible shape. What's different is the posture underneath that hoping. Panic hopes while gripping tightly, bracing for disappointment. treating every day of delay as a threat. Patient confidence hopes while resting, trusting that the process underway is trustworthy, even when its pace doesn't match your preference. Both postures are aimed at the same outcome, but one exhausts you along the way, and the other sustains you. It's worth being honest that this shift rarely happens all at once, and it rarely happens permanently in a single moment either. You might find yourself living in patient confidence for a stretch of days, only to feel the old panic rise back up when a fresh disappointment lands, or when the wait stretches longer than you expected it to. That's not a failure or a step backward that erases the ground you've gained. Growth in this area tends to move in a spiral rather than a straight line. You return to the same terrain repeatedly, but each time, you return to it from a slightly different place than before, carrying a little more of what's been formed in you along the way. And here is where this leads us, into the final and most important part of what we've been building toward together. Because if the promise itself is still unresolved, still hasn't taken the visible shape you're hoping for, the natural next question becomes, what does peace actually look like while still living inside the unresolved? Not peace as the absence of longing, not peace as pretending the weight doesn't hurt anymore, but a real, settled peace that can coexist with an open question. That's where we're headed now, into the resolution of everything this season has been forming in you, and into a clearer understanding of what it means to trust that what you see is not the final word. Let's return gently to the question that started all of this. What do you do when your circumstances contradict what you believe God said to you? You've been living inside that contradiction for a while now, holding a promise in one hand and an unchanged reality in the other, unsure which one deserved your trust. And by now, hopefully, the answer has started to take a different shape than it had at the beginning. You don't have to choose between honoring what you see and honoring what was spoken, as if only one of them could be true. You can hold both. You can acknowledge the pain of an unresolved circumstance without letting that circumstance cast the deciding vote on what God is doing or whether He remembers you. What you see is not the final word. What God said is, that's not a phrase meant to erase the difficulty of your situation. It's meant to reposition it correctly, to remind you that visible reality, as real and painful as it is, was never the highest authority in this story. It was always meant to be temporary, changing, incomplete on its own. What was spoken carries a different kind of weight, one that doesn't fluctuate with your circumstances, one that remains true on the days it feels close and on the days it feels impossibly far away. Think back over everything this season has quietly built in you, even in the middle of a promise still waiting to be fulfilled. You've come to understand that delay is not denial, that the gap between the word and its fulfillment is not empty space, but active formation, roots forming long before anything visible breaks the surface. You've come to see that God's timing was never meant to be predicted or managed by human logic, and that surrender doesn't mean giving up on the promise. It means releasing your grip on how and when it arrives, while still holding tightly to the fact that it will. You've practiced anchoring your thoughts in what was spoken instead of only in what is loudest and most present, learning that pain and trust can occupy the same space without canceling each other out. And somewhere along the way, the question shifted. It stopped being only why hasn't this happened yet, and started becoming what is God doing in me while I wait? A question that turns waiting from an empty countdown into a season with real purpose. This is the transformation this entire journey has been leading toward, not the resolution of your circumstance. That's still ahead in whatever timing it comes. And no video, no matter how honest or how well-intentioned, can promise you exactly when that will be. But the transformation inside you, the shift from fear to trust, from confusion to clarity, from anxious striving to settled peace, that transformation is available to you now, today, regardless of what your circumstances currently look like. That's the part of this story you actually have agency over, not the timeline. The posture, settled peace, is different from the anxious striving you may have been living in for a long time. Anxious striving keeps score, measuring every unanswered day as evidence stacking up against you, treating God's faithfulness as something that needs to be proven on your terms and your schedule. Settled peace stops keeping that score. It stops measuring God's faithfulness by how quickly your timeline gets honored and starts recognizing something steadier, the quiet, ongoing work happening beneath the surface of your life. Whether or not it has produced visible fruit yet, settled peace doesn't require the absence of longing. You can still want the job, the healing, the reconciliation with your whole heart. But that wanting no longer has to come wrapped in panic. It can rest instead on a foundation that isn't shaken by delay. Because that foundation was never built on timing in the first place. It was built on trust in who God is, not certainty about when He'll move. If you take nothing else from this time together, let it be this: the space you're standing in right now, the one that feels so unresolved and so quiet, is not a sign that you've been forgotten. It is not evidence that you misunderstood what God spoke to you. It is the very place where that word is being formed into something real, in you first, long before it ever becomes visible around you. Your circumstances are honest about the present moment, but they were never qualified to speak about your future, and they were never meant to have the final word over what God is doing. That authority belongs to Him, and only Him, and He has not stepped away from you in this waiting, even on the days it has felt like He has. So here is where this leaves you, standing right where you are, in whatever unresolved circumstance brought you here today. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to pretend the weight doesn't hurt, or force yourself into a peace you don't yet feel. But you can begin gently to bring your thoughts back to what was actually spoken, again and again, as many times as it takes. You can release the grip you've been holding on how and when this resolves, while still holding on to the fact that it will. And you can trust that what is happening in you right now, quietly, unseen, is not wasted time. It is preparation. It is formation. It is God at work in the very place that looks, from the outside, like nothing is happening at all. If this time together spoke to something you've been carrying, consider letting it settle for a moment before you go. If it helped you, you're welcome to like this video. Leave a comment about what part of this resonated most with where you are right now. And subscribe if you'd like to keep walking through these truths together in the seasons ahead. Wherever you are in your own waiting tonight, hold on to this one thing. What you see is not the final word. What God said is,